What if I told you that the way most people try to lose belly fat is actually making it impossible to lose? Not just harder, actually impossible. Because there's a hormonal mechanism happening inside your body right now that determines whether you burn visceral fat or store more of it. And cortisol is at the center of everything. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes you're going to understand your own biology better than most doctors explain it. And you'll never look at stress, belly fat, or dieting the same way again. Let's start with the thing nobody talks about. Visceral fat is not the same as regular fat. It doesn't just sit there passively waiting to be burned. It's metabolically active tissue. It releases inflammatory compounds called cytokines. It disrupts insulin sensitivity. And it communicates with your organs in ways that drive disease. This is fat that wraps around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, deep inside your abdominal cavity. And the primary hormone that tells your body to store more of it is cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. It's ancient. It evolved to help you survive predators, famines, physical danger. When cortisol spikes, your body immediately starts protecting itself by pulling glucose into the bloodstream, suppressing unnecessary functions, and storing energy around your vital organs. Because visceral fat is your body's emergency fuel reserve. The problem is that in the modern world, cortisol spikes constantly from poor sleep, processed food, emotional stress, over-exercising, under-eating, scrolling through your phone at midnight. Your body is running a survival program in a world where the predators are deadlines and traffic. So here's the scientific reality. As long as cortisol is chronically elevated, your body will actively resist burning visceral fat. It will even store more of it. This isn't a willpower issue. This is hormonal physiology. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Researchers have found that visceral fat has a disproportionately high concentration of cortisol receptors compared to subcutaneous fat, which is the fat under your skin. This means visceral fat is specifically tuned to respond to cortisol signals. When cortisol stays high, those receptors light up like a switchboard, and the fat storage process accelerates. But what happens when you actually bring cortisol down while creating the metabolic conditions to force your body to burn that visceral fat? This is where your biology does something remarkable. First, insulin sensitivity improves. Visceral fat is strongly linked to insulin resistance, and as cortisol drops, your cells begin responding to insulin more efficiently again. Glucose gets shuttled into muscle cells, rather than triggering additional fat storage. Your body stops needing to pump out excessive insulin just to manage blood sugar, and that hormonal environment begins shifting toward fat oxidation. Second, your adiponectin levels rise. Adiponectin is a hormone released by fat tissue itself, and it's essentially a fat-burning signal. Chronically elevated cortisol suppresses adiponectin. When cortisol normalizes, adiponectin climbs back up, and it specifically targets visceral fat cells, signaling them to release stored triglycerides into the bloodstream where they can be used as energy. Third, your liver starts recalibrating. Visceral fat drains directly into the portal vein, which leads straight to your liver. This is why visceral fat is so dangerous. High cortisol combined with visceral fat creates a situation where the liver is constantly being flooded with inflammatory signals and excess fatty acids. As cortisol drops and visceral fat shrinks, that liver stress decreases, hepatic insulin sensitivity improves, and your entire metabolic function gets better. Now let's talk about what your body physically feels like during this process, because this is where it gets real. In the early stages, as cortisol normalizes, many people report better sleep almost immediately. Cortisol and melatonin operate on opposite rhythms. When cortisol is chronically elevated at night, sleep quality tanks. Once it begins to normalize, deep sleep improves. And deep sleep is when human growth hormone pulses, which is another critical driver of fat metabolism, specifically in visceral regions. As visceral fat begins to actually decrease, which takes weeks to months, not days, people report that their midsection feels less firm and bloated. Visceral fat creates a hard, distended look rather than soft fat. As it reduces, inflammation drops, the gut environment improves, and that hardness softens before the visual reduction even becomes obvious on the outside. Energy levels stabilize in a way that chronic stress sufferers have often forgotten was even possible. Without that constant cortisol-driven blood sugar roller coaster, you stop getting those afternoon crashes. The desperate cravings for sugar and refined carbohydrates that cortisol-driven hunger produces. Here's the psychological layer that science is now confirming. Visceral fat itself produces inflammatory cytokines that cross into brain function and amplify anxiety, irritability, and depressive patterns. This creates a vicious cycle where visceral fat generates psychological stress, which raises cortisol, which stores more visceral fat. When you break that cycle by addressing cortisol first, the mental and emotional improvements can feel almost disproportionate to what you expected from a fat loss process. So how do you actually force this biological shift? The research consistently points to a few core mechanisms. Prioritizing sleep above almost everything else because nighttime cortisol regulation is when the deepest metabolic repair happens. Resistance training over excessive cardio because chronic long-duration cardio actually spikes cortisol significantly, while resistance training improves cortisol patterning and drives visceral fat loss directly. Strategic eating windows that align with your cortisol rhythm, which naturally peaks in the morning and should be lowest at night. And aggressive stress nervous system work, because for many people this is the missing variable that no amount of diet optimization will compensate for. Your body is not broken. It is executing a program that made sense for a different environment. Once you understand that visceral fat is a cortisol-driven survival response, the entire approach to eliminating it shifts from fighting your body to working with its own biology. This is why the people who address cortisol first consistently lose visceral fat, when everything else they tried failed. The science is clear. Zero chronic cortisol means your body finally has permission to burn what it spent years protecting.